They say blood is thicker than water. But nobody, and I mean nobody, ever warns you about what happens when the blood turns on you. My name is Daniel. I am 34 years old, and for the majority of my adult life, I held one belief above everything else. Family first. Always. No matter what. No exceptions. I was the kind of person who would drop everything at 2 in the morning if a family member called. I was the kind of person who gave without being asked and never kept score. I believed, truly, deeply believed, that the people who shared my blood would never be the ones to destroy me. I was wrong. In the span of 6 weeks. 6 weeks that I will never fully recover from. The people closest to me dismantled everything I had spent 11 years building. My savings, my business, my home, my reputation, my sense of safety in the world. Everything I had constructed from nothing, from a beat-up truck and a second-hand lawn mower and more early mornings than I can count, was taken from me. Not by strangers, not by competitors, not by some faceless corporation, by my brother, by my sister, and in a different way, by my own parents. But here is what they did not count on. They did not count on the fact that a man who builds something from nothing once can do it again. And this time, he knows exactly who the enemy is. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, every single person who betrayed me faced consequences they did not see coming. And I want you to hear every detail, because you deserve to understand exactly what happened and exactly how it ended. This is my story. If this story that followed possible. For the first 2 years of Marcus working at Greenstar, things appeared to function well. He was charming, genuinely charming, in the way that some people simply are. Clients liked him. He remembered names, asked about families, followed up on conversations from months earlier. In that specific social dimension, he delivered what he promised. But I started to notice things. Small things at first. The kind of things you explain away because the alternative explanation is too uncomfortable to sit with. Clients would occasionally mention commitments Marcus had made on behalf of the company. A discounted rate here, a free extra service there, a schedule adjustment that conflicted with our existing commitments, that he had never communicated to me. When I raised this with him, he was always relaxed about it. Relax, Danny. I was keeping them happy. Isn't that the point? And I would let it go because the clients were happy and nothing had actually gone wrong yet. Then came the invoice. I was reviewing our monthly supplier costs, something I did personally, every month, without exception, and one line item stopped me cold. We were being billed by a supplier I did not recognize, at a rate significantly higher than what we paid our established contacts for the same materials. I pulled the supplier's registration details. The company had been registered 6 months earlier. The listed director was a woman named Patricia Holt. Patricia Holt was Marcus's girlfriend. I sat with that information for a full 10 minutes before I did anything. I remember the feeling very clearly. It was not immediate rage. It was something colder than that. A slow, spreading recognition. Like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom and seeing something you did not want to see taking shape. I went to Marcus directly. I put the invoice on the desk in front of him and I asked him to explain it. He denied it first. Told me Patricia had started a legitimate supply business and that it was a coincidence that we had ended up using her. When I pushed harder, when I showed him that the pricing was 22% above market rate, he shifted. He told me I was being paranoid, that I was threatened by his success, that I had always needed to be the one in control and could not stand watching him build something of his own. And then he cried. I want to be clear about this because it matters for everything that comes later. Marcus was an exceptional manipulator, not in some dramatic, movie villain way. In the quiet, precise, emotionally intelligent way that the most effective manipulators operate. He knew exactly which lever to pull. He knew that I felt residual guilt about having built something successful when he had struggled. He knew that our parents had sometimes, not often, but sometimes, compared us in ways that stung him. He used all of that. He told me how hard it had been, watching me succeed while he stumbled from job to job, how he had never had the same opportunities, how the business had been a chance for him to finally feel like he was standing on equal ground with me, and how it broke his heart that I was accusing him of something so dishonest. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I told him we needed to return to our established suppliers immediately, and he agreed without argument. I told him that any future supplier changes needed my written approval, and he nodded and said of course. I told myself the matter was closed, but I had made the single most costly mistake a business owner can make. I had discovered evidence of fraud, confronted the person responsible, accepted their denial and emotional performance as sufficient explanation, and moved on without consequence or documentation. Marcus learned something critical from that confrontation. He learned that I would not follow through. Around the same time, my parents had started calling me with increasing regularity. Not to check in, not simply to talk, but to ask for financial help. My father's truck needed repairs. My mother needed dental work she had been putting off for years. Then there was a plumbing issue at their house that turned into something more significant. Then my father mentioned wanting to visit an elderly relative overseas and needing help with the cost. I gave every time, without hesitation, without keeping track, without resentment. They were my parents. This is what you do. What I did not know, what I would not discover until much later, was that Marcus was also extracting money from them. Not directly, not obviously, but through a campaign of carefully constructed narrative. He had told them, over months of phone calls and visits, that I was a difficult employer, that I underpaid him, that I took credit for his contributions to the business, that the growth they were proud of me for had actually been significantly driven by Marcus's relationship management, and that I refused to acknowledge it. He was building a case. Brick by brick, conversation by conversation, he was constructing a version of events in my parents' minds that would serve him when the time came. He was not reactive. He was not impulsive. He was patient. And I had no idea. When I was 31, I received a medical diagnosis that required minor surgery. Nothing life-threatening, nothing dramatic. A routine procedure that my doctor told me would have me back on my feet within 2 weeks, 3 at the outside. I had never taken significant time away from the business before, not once in 9 years. The idea of stepping away, even temporarily, made me deeply uncomfortable, but I had no choice. I made what I believed was the responsible decision. I sat down with Marcus and walked him through everything. Every active client, every pending contract, every supplier relationship, every financial obligation due in the coming weeks. I gave him temporary signing authority on the business account. Limited authority, I believed, sufficient only for operational expenses. I told him to call me with anything he was unsure about. Then I went in for surgery. The procedure went as expected. My recovery began on schedule, but at the start of the 3rd week, there were minor complications, nothing serious, but enough that my doctor strongly advised I extend my rest period. So I stayed home. I slept. I recovered. I trusted that the business I had spent nearly a decade building was in safe hands. While I lay at home recovering, Marcus moved. He had been planning this for months. I know that now with certainty. My surgery date was not a random trigger. It was the window he had been waiting for. A window that, I would later discover, Chloe had helped him identify and confirm. He began by contacting our top 8 commercial clients. The 8 clients who collectively represented over 60% of Greenstar's annual revenue. The clients I had spent years cultivating, attending their events, remembering their children's names, showing up personally whenever there was an issue, pricing fairly even when I could have charged more. He told each of them, individually, privately, before any of them could compare notes, that Greenstar Property Services was experiencing serious financial difficulties and would be closing. He expressed regret. He positioned himself as the competent person who had kept the operation running and who was, fortunately, in a position to continue serving them under a new structure. He told them about Prime Green Solutions, his company, registered quietly 3 months earlier, using the same supplier networks, the same operational knowledge, the same client relationships, everything he had learned and accessed through Greenstar. 7 of the 8 clients signed contracts with Prime Green. 7. He then contacted 3 of my most senior employees, my team leaders, the people I had invested in, trained personally, trusted with the day-to-day management of crews. He offered them positions at Prime Green at slightly higher salaries. All 3 accepted. And then, with the clients secured and the key staff in place, he accessed the business account. He withdrew $42,000. $42,000. Money that represented operational reserves I had built up over years of careful financial management. Money I had protected through slow months and unexpected costs, and every lean period the business had weathered. Gone. In a single transaction. I found out about none of this from Marcus. I found out because one of the remaining clients, one of the 1 in 8 who had not signed with Prime Green, called me directly to ask what was happening. He had heard from another client that Greenstar was closing and wanted to know if it was true. He was concerned. He had been with us for 6 years. I remember the exact moment I took that call. I was sitting in bed, still in my recovery, and I felt the floor drop out from under me even though I was lying down. I ended the call. I called Marcus immediately. He did not answer. I called again, and again, and again. When he finally picked up, on the 5th attempt, nearly 40 minutes later, he was completely calm. His voice had that particular quality I would come to recognize as his baseline state when he believed he had already won. Flat, slightly bored, the tone of someone who has moved on. He told me, and I remember every word, the business wasn't going anywhere, Danny. I built most of those client relationships anyway. It made sense for me to move on and do something properly for myself. You should understand that. I asked him about the $42,000. He told me it was back pay, compensation for years of being underpaid and undervalued. He told me he deserved every cent and more. I could not speak for a moment. There was a sound in my ears like static, like the world had momentarily lost signal. When I found my voice, I told him I was going to call our parents. He told me, calmly, that I could do whatever I wanted. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, and I tried to stay composed. I told her what Marcus had done. I explained the clients, the employees, the money. I was shaking. My voice was not steady. I was still physically recovering from surgery, and emotionally this was something I had no framework for. And my mother said to me, She said, "Daniel, you need to calm down. Marcus told us you have been treating him badly for months. You need to stop and look at how you have been behaving." The silence that followed that sentence was the longest of my life. Marcus had called them while I was recovering, while I was lying in bed trusting that my family was intact. He had been on the phone with my parents, systematically, methodically, delivering his version of events, framing it all, positioning himself as the wounded party, activating every seed of doubt he had planted over the previous months. My father got on the phone next, and Victor, the man whose handshake I had treasured on the day I bought my house, told me to stop trying to destroy Marcus out of jealousy. He told me I had always needed to be the center of attention. He told me I was selfish. I had given that man money without hesitation every single time he needed it. I had never asked for a single thing in return. And sitting there in my recovery, still weak from surgery, with my business crumbling and my savings gone, he called me selfish. I ended the call, and then I sat in the silence of my house for a very long time. But there is one more thing I have not told you yet. One more piece that, when I learned it, changed the nature of this betrayal entirely. About 3 weeks after everything collapsed, I received a call from Jamie, one of the 3 team leaders who had left Green Star for Prime Green. She had been struggling with what she had participated in. Her conscience had been eating at her. She called me and asked if we could talk. We met for coffee. She told me everything she knew. She told me about the planning, about the timeline, about how Marcus had approached her months before my surgery. But then she told me something that I was not prepared for. She told me that she had once overheard Chloe on the phone with Marcus. Chloe, my little sister, the one I had walked to school, the one I had bought school supplies for, the one I had protected. Chloe had been feeding Marcus information for months. Which clients I was most emotionally invested in, which employees were most loyal to me personally, whether I had noticed the supplier fraud, what my daily schedule looked like, when my surgery was scheduled, and exactly how long my recovery was expected to be. She had given Marcus the map, and he had followed it. My own sister had helped plan the destruction of everything I had built. I drove home from that coffee meeting in complete silence. I did not turn on the radio. I did not make any calls. I just drove, and I let that information settle into me like something cold and heavy sinking to the bottom of still water. And somewhere on that drive home, something inside me finished grieving and started calculating. I want to be honest with you about what the months that followed looked like, because I think it would be dishonest to skip straight to the revenge without acknowledging what rock bottom actually feels like. And I think some of you listening to this know exactly what I am about to describe. Green Star collapsed quickly once the major clients were gone. With 60% of revenue missing overnight and the account drained, I could not make payroll for my remaining employees. I had to let every one of them go. People who had been with me for years. People whose families depended on those wages. I sat across from each of them individually and told them, that is not something you forget. With the business gone and the debts accumulating, I had no choice but to sell the house. The house I had stood in on collection day and cried. The house my father had shaken my hand in front of. I sold it at below market value because I needed the transaction to move quickly. I moved into a single rented room in a shared house. I was 31 years old and I owned a second-hand car and the clothes in my wardrobe and very little else. The financial devastation was significant, but I want to be honest, the emotional toll was worse. I stopped eating properly, not as some dramatic gesture, just because food stopped feeling important. I would go entire days on coffee and whatever was in arm's reach. I was not sleeping. I would lie awake at 3, for in the morning replaying conversations. Replaying moments I had chosen to trust Marcus when something small had told me not to. Replaying Chloe's voice, warm and familiar, knowing now what she had been doing behind it. Replaying my father calling me selfish while I sat there still bruised from surgery. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being betrayed by people you loved without reservation. It is not like other pain. It does not just hurt, it disorients you. It makes you question your own perception of reality. If I was so wrong about these people, what else am I wrong about? If someone who shared my childhood could do this, what does that say about my ability to read the people around me? For approximately 2 months, I was barely functional. I showed up to a temporary job I had found. I paid my rent. I answered my phone when I had to, but I was running on something very close to empty. And then, gradually, something began to shift. I cannot point to a single moment. It was more like a slow accumulation of small things. A phone call from an old friend who listened without offering solutions and without judgment. A morning where I woke up and the first thing I felt was not grief, but something sharper. Something colder. Anger. Not the hot, reactive, unfocused anger of the early weeks. Something different. Something that had been refined by weeks of pain into something precise and purposeful. I lay in that small rented room, and I thought about Marcus's voice on the phone. Flat. Slightly bored. Already past me. And I made a decision. I was not done. Not even close. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Her name was Andrea. She came recommended by an old business acquaintance who had been through a commercial dispute of his own. She was sharp, direct, and completely uninterested in any emotion I brought into her office. She wanted facts. She wanted documentation. She wanted a timeline. I gave her everything. Because here is something about me that Marcus had fundamentally miscalculated. I am meticulous. I had kept records of everything since the first year of Green Star. Every invoice, every contract, every bank statement, every email, every signed agreement with every client. Years of documentation stored carefully, backed up in multiple locations. I had done this not because I anticipated betrayal, but because it was simply how I operated. Marcus had assumed that I would be too devastated to fight. He had assumed that the emotional weight of the betrayal, the family dimension of it, would paralyze me. He had built his plan around the idea that I was the kind of person who would absorb this, grieve privately, and eventually move on. He had confused my loyalty with weakness. Andrea reviewed the documentation over 2 days and called me back with a clear assessment. We had grounds for a civil lawsuit covering breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, misappropriation of business assets, and theft. The $42,000 withdrawal alone, she told me, was sufficient to pursue criminal charges independently of the civil case. We filed the civil lawsuit first. Marcus was served papers at his home address 3 weeks later. His response, relayed through his own lawyer, was that the withdrawal was legitimate compensation and that the client transitions were voluntary decisions made by independent parties. His position was confident. He had clearly convinced himself that confidence was sufficient. It was not sufficient. Because 2 weeks into the legal process, Jamie came forward again, this time not just with her testimony, but with emails. She had kept a personal archive of her work correspondence, including a series of emails between herself and Marcus that predated my surgery by 4 months. In those emails, Marcus discussed the plan with a specificity that left no room for interpretation. He referenced the client list by name. He discussed the timing around my surgery window. He outlined the plan to register Prime Green and transfer relationships before I could respond. He had put it in writing. When Andrea reviewed those emails, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He handed us the case." The civil trial lasted 3 days. Marcus's legal team attempted several angles. That the emails were taken out of context, that the client transitions represented legitimate competition, that the withdrawal was agreed compensation. The judge was not persuaded by any of it. The documentation was too thorough. The emails were too explicit. The pattern of behavior was too clear. We won. The judge ordered Marcus to repay the $42,000 in full. He ordered an additional $68,000 in damages covering lost revenue from the client defections, business dissolution costs, and the forced property sale. He ordered Marcus to cover my legal fees, $120,000. And then the criminal case began. The theft charge, based solely on the account withdrawal, moved forward separately. Marcus was now facing the civil judgment and a criminal defense simultaneously. His finances, stretched thin from launching Prime Green aggressively and maintaining its early operations, could not absorb both. Because here is the thing about a business built on charm and stolen foundations, it does not last. Without the operational infrastructure I had provided, without the genuine client relationships built on years of reliable service, Prime Green was struggling badly within its first year. Marcus was charming, but charm does not fix scheduling failures. Charm does not compensate for the operational knowledge he never actually possessed himself. Clients who had signed with him out of inertia were already beginning to look elsewhere. Facing financial pressure, a criminal trial he could not afford to lose, and a civil judgment he had to service, Marcus made the only calculation available to him. He pleaded guilty. He received a suspended sentence, a community service order, and a criminal record that will follow him for the rest of his professional life. Prime Green Solutions closed its doors 18 months after it had opened. I want to pause here for a moment and tell you about Chloe, because her story does not end in a courtroom. I chose not to pursue legal action against Chloe, not because what she did was forgivable. It was not, but because the legal route for her specific involvement was complicated, and honestly, I did not need a court to deliver her consequences. I told the truth. That was all. I sat down with every mutual friend, every extended family member, every aunt and uncle and cousin who had watched me grow up and build something from nothing. And I told them exactly what Chloe had done. Not with anger, not with drama, not with exaggeration. I simply laid out the facts in the order they happened and let people draw their own conclusions. The response was severe. People who had adored Chloe, who had seen her as the gentle, sweet youngest child, were genuinely shaken. Several family relationships she had valued broke irreparably. The social world she had existed in contracted sharply. She lost the easy warmth that people had always extended to her, because people now saw it differently. They now understood that the sweet face had been covering something she was capable of. The last I heard, she had relocated to a different city. I do not know whether that was driven by guilt or shame, or simply the practical desire to escape a social environment that had turned cold. I have not asked. I do not intend to. As for my parents, this resolution was the most complicated, and in some ways the most painful, because unlike Marcus, whose actions I had always, somewhere in my gut, been prepared for, my parents' betrayal came from a place I thought was safe. About 8 months after the civil case concluded, my mother called me. Marcus had been keeping the details of the lawsuit vague with them, telling them it was a minor business dispute that had been blown out of proportion. But the criminal case had made local news. And when my mother read the actual details of what her oldest son had done, she called me. She was quiet for a very long time at the start of that call. Then she said, "Daniel, I am so sorry. We were so wrong. I am so deeply sorry. My father took longer." Victor was a proud and stubborn man, and admitting that he had been deceived and that he had wounded his son in the process did not come easily to him. But 3 months after my mother's call, he telephoned me on a Sunday evening. He did not say much. He was not a man who used many words for emotional things. But he said he was sorry, and he said he was proud of how I had handled it. I cried after that call, standing in my kitchen, phone still in my hand. I have rebuilt a relationship with my parents. It is not what it was before all of this. There is a scar there that does not fully disappear. Trust, once broken, that specifically leaves a mark. But we speak. We see each other. And I believe that they are genuinely sorry. That has to be enough, and most days it is. I am 34 years old. I have rebuilt. Not completely. These things take time, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I have a new business. Smaller than Greenstar at its peak, but growing. And this time, I am the only person with signing authority on any account. This time, every key decision is documented. This time, I do not confuse loyalty with trust, and I do not extend trust before it has been earned. People who knew me before sometimes say I seem different now. Colder, maybe. More guarded. Less quick to give. I understand why they see it that way, but I do not think I am colder. I think I am clearer. There is an important difference between a person who does not care and a person who has learned the precise value of what they are protecting. Here is what I want you to take away from everything I have shared today. Document everything. Every agreement. Every conversation that matters. Every financial transaction. Not because you expect betrayal, but because documentation is what separates a story from a case. Know the difference between loyalty and leverage. I love my brother. That love was real, but he used it as a tool. The moment someone begins using your love for them as a mechanism to extract compliance or silence from you, that is not a relationship. That is an arrangement that serves only one party. And perhaps most importantly, do not let them define what you are capable of by what they put you through. The people who betrayed me built their plan around a very specific assumption about who I was. They assumed that my care for family would be the thing that stopped me from fighting back. They assumed that the emotional dimension of what they had done would leave me too damaged and too conflicted to respond. They were wrong about all of it. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, a family member, a friend, a partner, drop a comment below. Tell me your story, because you are not alone. And sometimes the most powerful thing is just knowing that someone else has walked the same road and came out the other side standing. If you enjoyed this story, Please like this video and subscribe. New stories every week. And remember, living well really is the best revenge. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next video.